The sun was falling behind the ridges of Red River Valley, staining the dry plains with the color of dying embers. The world was quiet, except for the creak of an old windmill and the distant cry of a hawk. For 12-year-old Lena Whitford, it was the hour she feared most, when the light began to fade, and the shadows stretched long over the prairie. Her father had been gone 3 days, searching for stray cattle, and her stepmother was sick again, leaving Lena to fetch water alone from the creek. The old path wound through mesquite and sagebrush, silent except for her own breath. That's when she sighed. At first she thought it was a scarecrow, a dark shape against the pale cottonwoods. But as she came closer, she froze. A man bound by the wrists hung limply from a tree branch, the ropes cutting deep into his skin. His chest moved barely at all. His face was burned by sun and blood. For a long moment, Lena could only stare. Every story her father told about Comanche raiders flooded back, fierce, merciless, killers of settlers. And yet, the man before her didn't look like a monster. He looked broken, human. She glanced around, no one. Just the moon of wine through the branches. "Sir," she whispered. No answer. She stepped closer, trembling, her fingers cold despite the heat. A crow landed nearby and screamed. The sound jolted her. She saw the marks, boot tracks, horse prints. Someone had left him here to die. And by the looks of it, not long ago. Her heart thudded. If I help him, and Pa finds out. But she couldn't move away. Something in his face, the way his jaw was clenched, as if even in death he refused to yield, pulled at her. Lena found her small knife in her pocket, its edge dull from farm work. She looked up again. The man's lips moved faintly. A whisper, no words, just breath. That was enough. Climbing the tree took all her strength. The rope was staked, knotted high. She saw the raw skin beneath it, blood dried to brown. She bit her lip, sawed the blade back and forth. Her arms shook. Then, with a sudden crack, the rope snapped, and the body fell hard to the ground. Lena scrambled down after him, panting. The man groaned, alive. For the first time, she saw his eyes open, dark, fierce, yet filled with pain. He looked at her, confused, then fainted again. She knelt beside him, dirt clinging to her knees. Somewhere behind her, thunder rolled across the plains. The last light of the day touched the warrior's face. Lena whispered, more to herself than to him, "I won't let you die here." And as the wind rose, carrying the smell of rain and blood, she knew her world had just changed forever. The night fell quickly, swallowing the last trace of sunlight. By the time Lena dragged the man beneath the cottonwoods, the sky had turned a deep bruised purple. Wine carried the smell of wet earth and thunder. He was heavy, his body limp and feverish. Every breath came sharp and uneven. She dropped beside him, breathless, mud splashed across her dress. His wrists were bound tight, the ropes cutting deep. She tore a strip from her hem and pressed it against the wound on his side. Her hand shook, slick with blood. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, "When something's dying, you either walk away or finish the job." But Lena didn't walk away. She pressed harder, whispering, "Don't you die on me now." The rain began as a whisper, then fell steady. She covered him with a horse blanket from her bucket. When his eyes opened, dark and clouded, they locked with hers. There was pain there, and anger, but beneath both, something lost. "You're safe," she said softly. He tried to speak, but the words came broken, his tongue heavy. A few strange sounds, then one word, fragile, questioning. "Why?" Lena hesitated. The wind lifted her hair, because no one else would. The storm rumbled. Lightning flickered through the branches, showing his face, a man carved by hardship, scarred, yet proud even now. He was younger than her pa, but older somehow in his eyes. She stayed awake most of the night, her back pressed against the tree, listening to his ragged breaths. The ground turned to mud around them. She whispered prayers she barely remembered. By dawn, the rain had slowed to mist. The air smelled of cedar and earth. The man was still alive, barely. She could see the faint pulse in his neck, slow but steady. Lena stood, her bones aching from the cold, The farm was miles away. If she went back now, she could pretend she'd seen nothing. But if she left him here, he'd die alone. And if she took him home, her father would shoot him before asking a single question. A Comanche's mercy is the same as a rattlesnake's pretty till it bites. But he didn't look like a snake. He looked like someone who'd been bitten enough. Lena fetched water from the nearby spring. When she returned, he was awake, half sitting, his wrist still tied. She hesitated, then lifted her knife. He didn't flinch. She cut through the ropes. They fell away, leaving raw skin beneath. He rubbed his wrist slowly, breathing deep. "What's your name?" she asked. "Soha," he said after a pause. She tried it softly. "Soha." He nodded once. "And you?" "Lena." He looked toward the pale light between the trees. "Your people will come." She shook her head quickly. "Not if we're careful." He studied her face, then said quietly, "You risk much, Lena." She swallowed. "You'd do the same." His eyes softened. "Once," he said, "long ago." For a short while, the woods were still. The storm had passed, and morning light crept softly through the wet leaves. Lena fed the man sips of water, careful not to spill. His eyes followed her every move, calm now, but sharp, as if weighing something unseen. "You helped me," he said slowly, his voice rough. "Now they will hunt you too." Lena's stomach tightened. "Who?" He looked toward the open prairie. "The ones who tied me to that tree." Before she could answer, a faint sound drifted through the distance, rhythmic, steady. "Hoofbeats." Lena froze. The sound grew louder, rolling like thunder across the wet ground. She looked at Soha. His gaze had already gone hard, alert. "How many?" she whispered. He tilted his head, listening. "3, maybe 4. Panic gripped her chest. The trees around them suddenly felt too thin to open. She grabbed the blanket and the bucket. "We have to hide." Soha tried to stand but staggered. She caught his arm and pulled him toward the creek that wound behind the trees. The water was shallow, cold, and full of reeds. They crouched low, pressing themselves into the mud. The hoofbeats came closer, loud now, echoing between the cottonwoods. Lena peeked through the branches. 3 riders emerged from the mist, rifles across their saddles, hats low against the drizzle. She recognized one, the scarred face of a man named Brig, her stepmother's cousin. Her heart slammed in her chest. "Tracks, and here," Brig growled, swinging down from his horse. "He's close." Another rider spat into the mud. "If he ain't dead already." Lena pressed a hand over her mouth. The horses snorted, hooves churning the wet earth just a few yards away. One of the men dismounted and walked toward the creek. Soa's hand closed around her wrist, firm but steady, a warning to stay still. His breathing was shallow, almost silent. The man paused, squinting into the reeds. Then thunder rumbled far away, breaking the moment. "Nothing here," he muttered, turning back. They mounted again, muttering curses, and soon the sound of hooves faded into the distance. Lena exhaled, trembling. Mud streaked her face, her hair plastered to her cheeks. She turned to Soha, who still watched the horizon. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "They never stop. We'll be gone before they do," she replied. He looked at her, really looked, and for a brief moment, something like trust flickered in his eyes. Lena helped him stand. He leaned on her shoulder, his strength barely holding. Together, they moved deeper into the forest, following the creek until the cottonwoods gave way to open field. Behind them, the land was quiet again, but the quiet felt heavy, like a secret that wouldn't stay buried for long. The sun rose behind the storm, pale and cold, spreading a thin light across the soaked prairie. Lena and Soha moved slowly, the ground soft beneath their boots. Mist clung to the low grass, and every breath came out white in the morning chill. Soha leaned on a branch he used as a crutch. His face was pale, his wounds still seeping through the rough cloth she'd tied. Yet he didn't complain. Every few steps he stopped, looked to the horizon, and listened, the way wild animals do, always aware of what hunts them. "Dry creek," Lena said between breaths. "If we can reach it by sundown, we'll be safe. There's an old barn there my pa used to keep horses." He nodded without looking at her. "Your father's place." "No," she said quickly. Farther west. No one goes there anymore. The path wound through stretches of mesquite and sage. The storm had left puddles that shimmered like silver in the sun. Birds circled high above. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Soha broke the silence. The man who hurt me, Brig. He hunts for coin. Lena nodded. He's a bounty man. Works for whoever pays him most. Sometimes for the sheriff. Sometimes worse. Soha's jaw tightened. He took from my people before. Women, children. He sells what he catches. Lena's stomach turned. You mean? He nodded once, eyes hard. He believes no law binds him. They walked in silence again, the weight of his words heavy in the air. Around noon, they found a fallen log and stopped to rest. The sun burned off the mist, leaving the land wide and exposed. Lena offered him a piece of dried bread from her satchel. He took it carefully, as if unused to being given anything. You saved me, he said quietly after a long while. But do you know what they'll do if they find you? Lena looked down. They already hate me for less. Saving you won't make it worse. He studied her face, then smiled faintly. You are not like them. She shrugged. Maybe that's not a good thing. Wind swept across the grass, bending it in long waves. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled again, soft this time, almost like a memory. Soha adjusted the bandage on his side, his hands steady despite the pain. My tribe calls this season the time of soft earth, he said. It's when the ground remembers the rain and gives life again. Hard to believe something can still grow after so much dying. Lena looked out at the horizon, endless and empty, yet strangely alive. Maybe that's why we keep walking. He followed her gaze and gave a small nod. Yes, maybe. By the time the sun dipped low, their shadows stretched long across the prairie. The light turned copper, washing the land in a warm and easy glow. A coyote cried somewhere in the distance, its voice rising and fading like a warning. There, Lena said, pointing toward a cluster of leaning trees. Through them, half hidden by tall grass, stood a sagging barn, the old shelter at Dry Creek. Its roof had collapsed in one corner, but the stone foundation still looked solid. They reached it at dusk. The air smelled of dust and dry hay. Inside, the barn was dark and quiet except for the rustle of mice. Lena guided Soha to a corner and helped him lie down on a pile of old sacks. He exhaled slowly, his body giving into exhaustion. This place, he murmured, it feels forgotten. That's why we're safe, she said, forcing a smile. She built a small fire in a rusted tin pan. The orange light danced across the cracked wooden beams. Shadows crawled up the walls like ghosts of things long gone. As she warmed her hands, Soha studied her in silence. Finally, he spoke. You said your father once kept horses here. Lena nodded. Before he sold the land. Before everything changed. What changed? She looked into the fire. He started hunting men. Soha said nothing, but his eyes darkened. After a moment, he asked, and you, why help me? A stranger, your enemy's enemy? Lena thought for a long time. Because my father used to tell me the world belongs to the strong. But when I saw you hanging there, it didn't feel right. She hesitated, searching for words. I couldn't let the world stay the way he said it was. So his gaze softened. Strength is not what kills, he said quietly. It is what endures. Outside, the night deepened. Wind moved through the barn's broken boards, whispering like distant voices. Lena fed another stick into the fire. Then she froze. A sound drifted through the darkness, faint at first, then clearer. Who's slow, deliberate, approaching from the east? Soha lifted his head, listening. They found us. Lena's heartbeat quickened. She doused the flame with dirt, plunging them into shadow. The barn filled with silence, broken only by the creak of wood and the wind sigh. Through a gap in the wall, she saw 3 silhouettes against the fading sky, riders. One held a lantern that swung gently, throwing long ribbons of light over the field. Brig, his voice carried across the distance. Spread out, the half-breed's alive. He won't get far. Lena turned to Tsoa. His eyes burned in the dark, calm but ready. "Can you run?" she whispered. He managed a small nod. "If I must, then we'll go by the creek," she said. "The old trail cuts through the ridge. They won't follow in the dark." They waited until the riders dismounted, until their voices drifted to the far side of the barn. Then, moving as one, Lena and Soha slipped through a gap in the wall and into the tall grass. The night swallowed them whole. Lena and Soha moved quickly, their steps muffled by wet grass. The sound of hooves faded behind them, though the echo still clung to the air like a heartbeat that wouldn't slow. The moon hung thin and sharp, a pale blade in the sky. The creek ran cold and fast beside them, silver under the starlight. They followed it north, where the land rose into low ridges covered in thorn and sage. The ground was slick, and Soha stumbled more than once, gripping her shoulder for balance. "Keep close," Lena whispered. "We can rest once we're over the ridge." He didn't answer, only nodded, breath shallow. She could tell every step hurt him, but he moved with the quiet endurance of someone who had learned pain long ago. Behind them, faint lights flickered again. Lanterns. The hunters were spreading out, cutting through the trees. Lena's stomach twisted. They reached a narrow gully, where the creek disappeared, under roots and fallen branches. Lena dropped to her knees and crawled through the mud, motioning for him to follow. The space was tight, the air thick with damp earth. When they emerged on the other side, the noise of pursuit had dimmed. Soha sank to the ground, chest heaving. His wound had reopened, a dark stain spreading across the bandage. Lena crouched beside him. "You need to stop the bleeding." He met her gaze, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "We stop, they find us. Then, let me do it quick." She tore another strip from her sleeve, pressed it firmly to his side. He winced but didn't pull away. His hand rested on the dirt, fingers gripping it like an anchor. "You've done this before," she murmured. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "I've been hunted before." Lena looked at him, truly looked, for the first time. The scars on his chest were old, faded lines crossing newer ones. She wanted to ask who had done it all, but the words caught in her throat. Thunder murmured far away, soft and hollow. "Why do they want you so bad?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Because I fought back." "Against who?" "Against everyone who thought I should kneel." The answer hung heavy between them. Lena didn't press further. She finished tying the cloth, her hands trembling less now. When she sat back, Soha leaned his head against the rocks, breathing steady. "You shouldn't have come with me," he said softly. "Your life would be easier." "Easier doesn't mean right," she replied. He turned his head toward her, studying her in the dim light. "You speak like someone twice your age." "Maybe I've seen too much," she said. He nodded once. "Then we are the same." For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the wind whisper through the ridges. The stars above looked close enough to touch, cold and bright. Then Soa's head lifted slightly. "They are coming again," he said. Lena heard it too, faint cracks of branches, a low whistle carried by the wind. This time closer. The sound came again, sharper this time. Voices carried across the ridge, low and deliberate. Lena's breath caught. "They're close," she whispered. Soha pushed himself upright, leaning heavily on his branch. "We move higher." They climbed the narrow trail that wound between slabs of rock. Every step scraped stone, every breath came short. The wind grew colder, whistling through the cracks. Below them, torchlight flickered. 3, maybe 4 riders spreading along the lower trail. Lena slipped once, her foot sliding in the mud. Soha caught her arm, his grip steady despite the pain. "Easy," he murmured. "Don't look down." They moved again, slower now. The ridge opened into a small plateau where the earth flattened just enough for them to rest. From here they could see the valley, a sea of shadows broken by moving lights. Soha knelt, his chest heaving. "They hunt like wolves," he said. "And you?" Lena asked, crouching beside him. "What were you before they called you prey?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then his voice came quiet, distant. "I led my people once, the Comanche who stayed north. When the soldiers came, we fought. They burned our camps, took all women. I thought if I surrendered, they'd spare the rest." He looked at his hands, scarred, weathered. They lied. The ones who chained me to that tree were bounty men for the army. They sell what they kill, and the rest they hang. Lena swallowed hard. You fought for your people. That's not wrong. He gave a dry laugh. In this land, right and wrong depend on who's holding the rifle. A shout echoed below. One of the hunters had found fresh tracks. Torchlight shifted, growing brighter. We have to go, Lena said. Soha stood swaying for a moment before steadying himself. There's a cave near the ridge line, he said. If we reach it, we can wait till dawn. They started moving again, half running, half stumbling over the rocks. The air thinned, biting cold against their skin. The sound of pursuit grew louder. Boots on stone, hooves striking earth. Suddenly, a shot cracked through the night. The bullet struck the ground inches from Lena's feet, spraying dirt. She gasped, ducking low. Soha turned, grabbed her hand, and pulled her behind a rock outcrop. They've seen us, he said, voice calm despite the danger. What do we do? He looked toward the ridge above. Climb. They scrambled upward as another shot rang out, sparking against stone. Lena's lungs burned. Her hands bled from the sharp edges. Soha moved ahead, dragging her up the final ledge just as the torches reached the base below. They collapsed inside the mouth of a shallow cave. Wind howled past the entrance, scattering dust and grit. From here, the riders were only dim lights in the darkness, their shouts swallowed by the wind. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy but alive, filled with the sound of two hearts refusing to stop. Finally, Lena said, "You could have left me." Dawn crept slowly across the ridge, turning the edges of the rocks gold. Inside the cave, the air was cold and still, smelling of damp stone and smoke from the small fire Lena had dared to build. Soha slept in the corner, his chest rising shallowly beneath the blanket. For the first time, she could see him clearly in the light, his face drawn and weary, his hair tangled with dust, his lips cracked. Yet there was something in him that seemed unbreakable, as if pain had carved strength instead of weakness. Lena sat close to the fire, rubbing warmth into her fingers. Outside, the land stretched endless and quiet, the valley below veiled in mist. The hunters were still out there somewhere. She could almost hear their voices carried by the wind, even if they were miles away. She turned to look at Soha again. His hands twitched slightly, and he murmured in his sleep, words in a language she didn't understand. They sounded like prayers. When he stirred awake, his eyes were distant, as though he was still half inside that dream. "You should have slept," he said, voice rough. "I couldn't," Lena replied. "Every sound feels like them." He nodded slowly. "Fear keeps you alive, but don't let it eat you. It forgets when to stop." She smiled faintly. "You sound like my pa. Your father is a wise man." Lena hesitated. "He used to be, before he started selling people." Soa's gaze held hers. "Then he sold himself first." The words cut deep, but they rang true. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulling out a small biscuit she had saved. "Eat. It's not much, but better than nothing." He took it without a word, breaking it in half and handing one piece back to her. She frowned. "You need it more." He shook his head. "When you share, you remind the world you're still human." They ate in silence. Outside, the sun rose higher, burning through the fog. The valley came alive with faint color, brown, gold, and red, the hues of the dry earth returning. Soha looked toward it, his expression unreadable. "Once," he said quietly, "this land had no fences, no lines on paper. My people moved with the seasons, followed the buffalo, the rivers. Now they build walls and call it peace." Lena hugged her knees, staring into the flames. "My stepmother says peace only comes after you've killed enough to earn it." Soa's eyes flicked toward her. "Then she has never known peace." A heavy silence settled. Lena wanted to ask him about his tribe, about the people he'd lost, but something in his face told her not to. Some stories, she realized, don't want to be spoken. They live too close to the wound. After a while, Soha stood slowly, steadying himself against the cave wall. "We can't stay long. They'll follow the tracks. If we reach the ridge trail, It'll take us west, to safer ground. Lena nodded, her heartbeat quickening again. She doused the fire with sand, watching the smoke curl up and vanish. The valley below was washed clean by the rain, every blade of grass shining like glass in the morning sun. The air smelled of sage and wet stone. For a few hours, the world seemed untouched. No smoke, no hoof prints, no voices. Lena walked ahead, scanning the ridgeline. Her boots sank into the soft earth, leaving clear tracks. Behind her, Soha moved slower, his steps measured, his breath shallow. He still carried his makeshift crutch, but there was something new in his posture, resolve, not survival. They followed the creek west until the ground widened into a flat stretch of land where broken fences leaned against the wind. An old settlement lay ahead, a handful of cabins half swallowed by weeds, a water pump leaning at an angle, the ghost of a town that once believed in tomorrow. Lena hesitated. "We can rest here," she said. "No one's lived in Dry Hollow for years." Soha scanned the horizon. Empty places aren't always safe. Still, exhaustion won. They entered one of the cabins, a single room with a collapsed roof and a rusted stove. Dust hung thick in the air. Soha sat by the wall while Lena searched the shelves, finding only a cracked jar of beans and a faded photograph of a family smiling at ghosts. "People build," he said quietly, "and the wind takes it back." Lena looked at him. "Maybe the wind has better judgment." He smiled faintly. "Maybe." They shared the last of their water. Outside, the wind changed soft at first, then sharper. A crow screamed somewhere far off. So his eyes narrowed. "Riders." Lena froze, heart pounding. "How can you tell?" "The wind carries them." He pointed toward the ridge. "Too close." She moved to the window, peering through the cracks. Dust lifted along the far trail, faint but growing. "Free riders." She recognized the shape of Briggs' hat before the light caught it. "They found us," she whispered. Soha pushed himself up, gripping the crutch. "Go out the back." "No," she said. "We can't keep running. You can barely stand." He looked at her, calm and sure. "Then we stand together." Before she could argue, the first gunshot shattered the silence, the bullet tearing through the cabin's wooden wall. Splinters flew past her cheek. Lena ducked. "Gown," Soha barked, pulling her toward the stove. Another shot cracked, the air filled with dust and smoke. "They'll circle," he said, eyes sharp. "You move when I say." Outside, Briggs' voice echoed across the empty town. "You can't hide, girl. You're aiding a murderer. Step out now, and maybe you live." Lena clenched her jaw, tears stinging her eyes. "He's lying." "I know," Soha said, "but lies sound louder than truth when shouted from a saddle." He gripped the crutch tighter, his eyes scanning the doorway. The moment stretched, silent and unbearable, until he whispered, "Now." They broke from cover, diving through the back wall as another bullet split the air. The creek shimmered ahead, sunlight flashing off the water. The sound of hooves thundered behind them, relentless, closing fast. Lena ran until her lungs burned, the creek glinting ahead like a blade under the sun. The river was swollen from last night's rain, its current strong and violent. Soha limped beside her, his crutch striking the earth in rhythm with her heartbeat. "They won't stop," she gasped. "They never do," he answered. His face was pale, his eyes steady, but the river might slow them. They reached the bank. The water rushed by in a brown surge, carrying branches and foam. Across it, the land rose steeply into the trees, safety if they could reach it. Soha looked at the current, then at Lena. "You can make it. What about you?" He smiled faintly. "I've crossed worse." A shout came from behind Briggs' men. They were close now, their rifles glinting in the light. One fired. The bullet whined past Lena's ear, vanishing into the roar of the river. "Go?" Soha pushed her forward. She hesitated, then plunged into the freezing water. It struck like ice and stone. The current pulled her under. She fought, kicking hard, her hands clawing for air. When she surfaced, gasping, she saw Soha wading in behind her, the water up to his chest. His crutch had been swept away. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and then another shot rang out. Soha staggered. Blood bloomed dark across his shoulder. "No," she screamed, trying to reach him. but the current spun her around, dragging her downstream. She caught a branch and held tight, watching helplessly as Soa fought to stay upright. Briggs' horse skidded to the riverbank. "You can't run forever, Redskin," he shouted, raising his rifle. Soa turned, chest heaving, water swirling around him. His gaze met Briggs', calm, almost peaceful. "I don't run," he said. He hurled a stone, not to kill, but to draw fire. Briggs' shot came instantly, missing by inches. The recoil threw him slightly off balance. It was enough. Lena screamed again, but the roar of the river drowned her voice. Soa dove, not away, but toward the current, letting it take him. The water swallowed him whole. Briggs cursed, firing twice more. The bullets lost in the churning waves, then silence. Only the river spoke. Lena dragged herself to the far bank, trembling, her dress soaked and torn. She looked back, the riders on the opposite shore, shouting, searching, but not daring to cross. The current was too strong now. Briggs spat into the river, furious. "Let him drown. We'll take the girl later." He turned his horse, and the sound of their retreat faded into the trees. Lena collapsed to her knees. The sun was high now, burning the mist away. For a long moment, she stared at the water, waiting, praying for any sign of him. Then, through the glare, something moved downstream, the sheet breaking the surface, clinging to a fallen log. Her breath caught. Soha was still alive. The river carried him for miles before it finally gave him back. Lena found him tangled in the reeds along the far bend, his body motionless, the water lapping gently at his shoulder. For one terrible moment she thought he was gone. Then his fingers twitched. "Soha," she cried, stumbling down the muddy slope. She pulled him onto the bank, pressing her hands to his wound. The blood had slowed, but the color of his skin told her he was fading fast. His eyes opened weakly. "You crossed," he whispered. "You made me," she said, choking on her words. "You didn't have to." He smiled faintly. "I did." For a long while, there was only the sound of the river and the whisper of the wind through the grass. Lena tore strips from her dress, binding his shoulder as best she could. His breathing steadied, slow but alive. When he tried to sit, she pressed him back. "Rest, please." He looked past her, toward the horizon. The land stretched wide and empty, the kind of silence only found after storms. "This place," he murmured. "It feels like the world forgot it." "Then maybe we can start over here," she said. "Just for a while." He didn't answer, but his eyes softened, the same eyes that had once seen war, loss, and mercy in equal measure. By noon, the sound of horses had vanished entirely. The hunters had turned back, leaving only the two of them with the river and the endless sky. Lena built a small fire using driftwood. Smoke rose thin and pale into the bright air. Soha watched it, as if reading something in the way it twisted and vanished. "My people," he said quietly, "believed the river carried more than water. It carried memory, all that lived and all that was lost." Lena listened, her hands folded tightly around her knees. "If that's true," she said softly, "then maybe it'll remember you too." He looked at her and smiled, not the weary smile of a wounded man, but one of peace. "Then it already has." For the first time since that night in the forest, Lena felt the weight lift. The world was still cruel, still broken, but there was something pure in the way the wind moved across the water, something that said, "You lived and it mattered." As the sun dipped toward the west, painting the sky in copper and rose, she sat beside him, both of them silent. Soa's hand found hers. His voice was barely more than breath. "When they tell this story, they'll say a child saved a warrior." She smiled through her tears. "No, they'll say we saved each other." The river kept moving, endless and calm, carrying their silence downstream, into the horizon where all stories end and begin again.